Hi. Kim Adolphe here with the CEO of CAP Corporation. Our website is concussionactiveprevention.com, and essentially that is exactly what we're all about. We're all about preventing concussions. This started, we launched CAP in 2016, but how it all began is I have other business called Gemini Swift Learning, and we develop online training for all kinds of different subjects, and I partnered with an expert that wanted to build courses in and around neck strength training and other different types of training for the purposes of reducing whiplash in order to prevent concussions. And I was just fascinated by this, and I went, oh, that's very interesting. You know, how does that all work? And of course, there's all kinds of research that talks about, you know, how weak necks and you know, how whiplash directly impacts your ability to obviously stabilize your head or your neck, and thus reduce that whiplash which causes concussion. So that led us to asking some questions. One was, well, I wondered, well, how do you test? How do you know, how at risk you are as a athlete in a contact sport to, for sustaining a potential concussion? And that was the first question that came to mind. And the second was, even if you did know how at risk you were, how do you know how strong you need to be in order to prevent that concussion? And that led us to doing some research. That's kind of my background. I launch companies, and you start with that market research, and we undertook that and found that whole sector, essentially prevention, concussions before they actually occur, literally doesn't exist. It's an industry that doesn't exist. And so that was, as you can imagine, really actually quite surprising to us, but obviously got us really thinking about, well, could we build a machine? Could we build a device? And could we test the kinematics and what actually goes on when a concussion goes, and could you do that in a safe manner? And so we brought on a group here. We're based in Calgary, Canada, and we brought on a group from Innovate Calgary, which is a government body that does a lot of research and patents and that sort of stuff. And we did the research and discovered that really there was no machine that could test. So we designed a prototype, and we built a machine, and we did some research with some university, primarily the University of Alberta at that time, had a bunch of athletes, and patented the machine. And from there, it just has evolved. We basically, we're the only company in the world today that can actually safely test the risk of sustaining a concussion. But also, we've designed training protocols that we have now also conducted research with the Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand. Okay. And we did a group of young soccer between the ages of 9 and 14. And we had them go through, we refer to it as our RAM machine. We did the test. Of course, we built sensor technology, and because I had a mobile learning platform, and the reason why I mentioned that is because we were able to capitalize on a lot of existing infrastructure that we already had. So we had management systems, and we had interfaces, and we had software developers, and I've done this for many, many years. So we're able to capitalize on that, build the machine, have the technology behind the scenes, test the athlete. The sensor technology would feed it back to our cloud-based management system, and then we'd gather all this data. So we were now in a position to not only do the testing, test the athletes for the risk, we were able to test the success of the actual training protocol. So we did a 16-week initial program, and that the athletes, that the soccer players went through, and then we gathered that data. And with that data, which is never, this type of data is never been gathered before. Right. So you can imagine the potential value for research there in and of itself. And we sent that data down to Auckland, and they are finishing this first set of studies. We did our own internal study on it as well. And the results are really astounding. And what's interesting, since then we've tested, we've got hockey players in the program, we've got football. just moving into combative sports. This has been endorsed by Floyd Mayweather Sr. out of Las Vegas, by the way, and many others. We've also partnered, as you know, with the States Development Football League, which is based in the States. Garrett Jones, who I know you know, is the commissioner there. And now they are just launching the Women's States Development Football League. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but that's super exciting. And they're making it mandatory. But the results in the study we did with the soccer players, it was a 300% improvement in strength. But what's interesting, and now, of course, we've gathered that much more data in various different sports now, and the results are, they're so weak. Even though in some of those sports they're doing training, a lot of it doesn't, it's fairly straightforward. Like the levels of strength that can be reached are just nowhere near what they could and should be.
Right.
And so where we want to go with this is we want it to be a safety standard. We truly believe that we can prevent, to some extent, we can completely prevent concussions. And of course, the earlier that you start, the better. Because there's all kinds of other benefits to doing this type of training. It speeds up quickness, I should say. It's better for balance. In hockey, it speeds up slap shots. It's good for speed. I mean, it's tremendous. The other offshoot benefits of just doing the neck training. But the primary one is, you can imagine, if you have, a head that does this when you get hit, or you have a head that, does this, right. Who's I mean, it's such a simple concept. Is the craziness of it all, you think, why is it taking us so long, to recognize it?
It appears as if it's something that's so simple, yet we've gone eons without even thinking about it. Because I know as a youngster, when we were training for sports, we do, okay, do this, okay, you're ready to go. That was, you'd lift weights for everything else, and you do all these other things, and your neck was like, okay, move this, move that, and you're good. And you think, well, this is what's holding my head up, but we didn't.
Yeah, and my brain.
But we didn't really do anything about that. So, well, your head's up there, you're okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's something that, as we're thinking about this and looking at concussions and impact trauma and all that stuff, but everything centers on what comes from here. So, yeah, like you said, we haven't thought about that before. You mentioned that you're looking at the study and going, no one's done this before. Huh.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And yet you think back to the 80s where neck training was a lot more popular, I guess. And you do look at various different sports, and you think of some of the famous boxers like Gracie and Tyson, who we've talked about a little bit, because the levels of neck strengthening that they did. And I know that they're going to be doing a show on the life of, or some sort of movie, or I don't know what it is, on Gracie, and these people that haven't even had those CTE symptoms that often come about, obviously, eventually in those sports, especially where you're, to say there's not a correlation between getting hit in the head and getting CTE is beyond comprehension in our mind. But also it's they look at that and they think, oh, well, why are more boxers actually do get CTE, for example, than football players, which is an interesting statistic. It's not the way that they're being hit, because really it's that rotational, getting hit this way, or,
right.
You've got to help you got more weight on your head, really. Is how you get a concussion. But in boxing, for example, it's that you're getting those concussive blows. So when you think about it, well, it's because you've been hit in the head so many times that it's little bleeding in the brain that starts to lead to scarce tissue, that starts to lead to that long-term symptoms that you end up getting, that cause CTE, essentially. So we did partner also. So we've got a lot of exciting new partners. Some have been there for a while. Most of them are early adopters, because it's interesting that so many people don't want to, change the status quo, because they're afraid to talk about concussions mainly. But we're trying to change that conversation too, because if you can show an athlete and the the leagues and the people in power can look at this and say, well, hey, if we can show the risk, it's good for so many things. Obviously, the athlete is the bottom line. But, you could look at, well, who's more at risk? Well, then you need to get stronger. This is what you need to do. Then you retest,
Right.
so it proves it. Then we know that they've done it. Then then it advances. And as they get into higher levels, the advancing and the more scientific the exercises, in fact, it individualizes it for the athlete. We actually individualize the training protocol as the athlete gets more advanced. So there's a lot of smarts and algorithms and science that's gone in behind. It's not, as you said, oh, here I go, there's my neck
Right.
training.
Yeah, I'm done, right.
Yeah, or I get on a neck machine. Okay, that's good to go. Most of that doesn't even carry over, and you're only generally doing the training in a linear. You're not actually training for that rotation.
Right.
It's far more complicated. So sometimes we'll say, oh well, we'll just go off and do some neck training and we'll be good to go. We don't need to test or anything at all like that. But unfortunately, if it were if it was that simple, we wouldn't have this epidemic that we do in this world, and we wouldn't see, sadly, the decline in a lot of these sports, football being one of them. Certainly up here in Canada, it's really declining, especially at the younger ages, because we believe we can really turn that around, and we believe we can turn the attrition rates around too. But it forces the athlete to take more responsibility too. And as long as you know what the risk is and you do what you're supposed to do, then everybody's aware. And if you do get injured, at least you're going into it, prepared, but also maybe reducing the risk, but also, you're taking, what risk you're taking.
Well, and I think you mentioned it just perfectly there. If we are aware of the risk, then we know how to tackle the problem. And I think what we've run across in the discussions I've been having with people, the awareness, getting the awareness out there. As you said, the number of people participating in some of these sports is declining because they're hearing about the problem, but they're not aware of any solutions or potential solutions. So you're hearing, well, we have CTE problems, 40 years down the road, so I'm not going to allow my child to play football. Well, that's kind of short-sighted when you don't look at how do we attack the problem. And it's nice that people like yourself and other people we've talked to, and again, the people you're partnering with, have said, okay, we're going to find a solution so we can still have participation and we can still have fewer problems down the road.
Well, that's right. And, just a couple things to touch on there. I mean, one, that's where we started, because that is my background is training and education. And that knowledge is power. And so it's what we started with, was let's educate people about how they can be more protective. That's literally where we started, which led to, the rest and realizing that it could be so much more than that. But yes, and then the partners are elite sports performance training people and ex-NFL, NHL athletes, and those types of people. Like I mentioned, Garrick Jones. He's an ex-CFL and NFL player who's had concussions.
Right.
They know, they've been there down that road. And that's why, of course, those are the people that, absolutely see, as you were describing, well, this just makes sense. And this puts athletes, in a position of power,
right,
and control.
And
so
they're the ones that understand what has happened because it's happened to them. So now we can see what the treatments are and if it's going to make us better or if we're going to have these problems down the road. So I think it's perfect the way you've had things set up.
Yeah. Well, and the other interesting thing I'll just mention is, so we have, of course, that's our primary focus. Let's just try and prevent concussions, but, and or at least reduce the severity as well if they do occur. But for those that are dealing with concussions, that's another really interesting area. We ended up partnering with Dr. Mark Tomerdale, who's the CEO of a company called Corticometrics, and they are based in North Carolina. And Dr. Mark Tomerdale is an ex-NASA neuroscientists,
Okay.
and developed this technology called Brain Gauge, which is a sensory motor testing device. And it basically is totally non-subjective because it's sensory motor testing. And it's widely used by the military and about 50 academic institutions, mainly in the US. And yet nobody, there's so many people that haven't even heard of it. And it's an amazing technology. But so on that repair side of it, obviously, or even on the prevention side of it, we test the physiological aspects and see the whole kinematics of what goes on when an athlete actually, is safely impacted using our device.
Right.
It's been clinically validated by the Canadian Society of Mechanical Engineering, so it's completely been, ordained, and it's completely safe. But the brain gauge tests your neurological. So we've got the physiological as well as the neurological, and it basically shows what's going on within the brain. So you don't need an MRI, and it tests for very subtle symptoms, which, you often can't test. And most of the programs out there for baseline testing and impact testing are, very subjective. SCAT5 and some of these programs you've probably heard of, but and some athletes, especially, and they know that if they say aren't highly educated, don't do well, because these tests are spell these words, do this backwards, do this, do that. They're so subjective, And then the third thing is if they have had a concussion, they can pass and get a high score on those types of tests. But they go back in the game and they get a concussion 3 weeks later. Well, the incidence of concussions once you've had one are dramatically higher.
Right.
And so we need a protocol for that. And we believe that once your symptoms, and you think your symptoms have disappeared, you need to test your neurological function. And if that is okay, then you should actually go and do our RAM test to test for neck dysfunction, because often there's still a bit of dysfunction. You might feel fine. You go back in, your neck reflexes aren't responding quick enough, and you get a concussion again 3 weeks later.
And then it puts you in a state where, right, exactly. So then once you have one, you're more susceptible to another and another and another, right?
Yeah, and we believe that's why. We believe that's, maybe not in 100% of the cases, but why is that happening? They're going back too soon.
Right.
And because this test is saying, oh, you're good to go. 3 to 5 days. What your brain is, when you get a bruise in your brain and there's bleeding, how, really, how can it heal in 3 to 5 days?
Right.
Just logically thinking through that, it's going to take a lot longer. Unfortunately, when you get a concussion, it's going to take longer.
It's the concept of, if you sprain an ankle, are you ready to go in 3 to 5 days? Probably not. So it's that, what is the normal healing process? But we're talking something, well, you can't really see it, so it's my brain, I'm ready to go. Instead of thinking,
exactly.
That's going to take longer to heal. Right, exactly.
And so it's all of this myriad of mistakes or problems or, I don't even know what to refer to them as, but misunderstandings as to how quickly, what's actually going on, where the dysfunction lies, how long it's going to heal. Like, it's just a combination of all those things that has made this whole situation around concussions and CTE, what it is today.
Well, I think what we've done, and correct me if I'm wrong, the problem that we have is because it is something that is not readily apparent. It's something that it's not, again, if I sprain an elbow, I can look at it and see it's the function or whatever. So, and again, without the proper testing and not really being able to deal with this in the past, we go, well, how do you feel? I feel fine. Okay, you're ready to go. Well, you can tell if you can't walk, if you can't put pressure on a leg or on an arm, but you can't tell whether your head is working right. And now we're coming up with testing where we can tell now.
Well, and that's a perfect example, because yes, you break a bone or you get a bruise and it's healed too. A doctor can say, oh yeah, you're good to go. But yeah, they don't have the tools just to analyze your brain and say, yeah, you're good to go. Or your neck dysfunction. And the tools just haven't been readily available. And so it's been very, very difficult to, you can't see it. So how do you assess whether it's whether you're truly healed? And of course, some athletes want to be healed, and for whatever reason, they want to get back in the game, either out of pressure or they're just obstinate.
We're all like
many reasons, right? But at least I think the really good thing is that people, we've kind of gone from that being oblivious to the whole problem to, now it's everybody's afraid of it, doesn't even want to talk about it, and people are, to hopefully getting to that next evolution of it, where we can say, hey, you know what, we can solve this problem, and but it's going to take the whole village.
Right.
That's the other thing.
As we spoke the other day, exactly. Right.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing. We've maintained the cost to be very, very reasonable. In fact, it's less expensive than if you go and get 2 baseline tests, because you got to get the first one. You go to the doctor, and then you got to go back if you do get a concussion, say, oh yeah, you're messed up. See you later.
Right.
Thanks.
Now we've got you. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now we're going to sell you some stuff to manage that. But anyway, I shouldn't that way, but it's frustrating. So it's $100 to $110 for the whole program, and we actually dedicate some of those revenues back to amateur sports and our concussion research. And so we're trying to remove those barriers, and we believe with our model, which is to partner with people that understand it, that have a vested interest, and are stakeholders in their athletes, that are buying into it. And so they manage it, and they get revenue in return for that, because it's all about getting everybody on board. And how best you do that? Well, you've got to go to these organizations where the athletes are, where they can implement and make sure that the training gets done. Because again, ours is a test. It will give you all of this information. That's the other cool part. The athlete actually gets access to their own information.
Great. Well, let me give you a little idea of where we're going with this from our end. We spoke with someone from Dublin, Ireland yesterday with the same basic concept of, how do we get from point A to point B to point Q, as far as how do we determine what's happening, pre-concussion, pre-injury, pre-everything, basic baseline testing. And then how do we get to the point where we don't have to worry about this anymore? And I think you used the right word, epidemic. Right now it is an epidemic, and something we have to work, and the village has to get together. So I think where we're headed here is, with these discussions and these ideas, we can get more specific as we go along. So if you wouldn't mind coming back a little bit later at another time and saying, now here's how we're tackling this. And maybe we put together with a few other people. Again, we talked to Garrett Jones and a few other people and say, now, how is this working? Now that we have this basic idea in place, how are we working and how are we making things improve? So, I think it's a great idea, what you're doing, a great concept of how you come up with it. And one thing that you mentioned was no one was doing it before. And the shock of that was, why haven't we thought about this before? Because we're looking at, I think, the end game and not the beginning part of it. So I think it's very impressive.
Right. Yeah. It's all reactive, it's proactive for sure.
Right.
And yeah. But I'd be delighted to do that. And in fact, as I mentioned, I'm speaking, we'll have a conversation tomorrow with Garrett Jones about our launch for the States Development Football League and their new league, which is the Women's States Development Football League. And as you know, they've just got their first female umpire in the NFL.
Right, umpire, right.
Have you seen that? Umpire.
Yeah.
Umpire, Lord.
Referee.
Anyway, yay. Thanks for that correction. Anyway, I'm like, wait a minute, that's not right.
We'll blame
but that's pretty
the language difference between America and Canada there.
Yeah, we'll chalk it up to that. Yeah, we'll chalk it up to that. But where the launch is going to be in Vegas, so maybe it'll be an opportunity to. It might be something. I'll keep you informed on that. And I believe, but that's what we're confirming tomorrow. But I think it's in April.
Okay.
So, yeah,
We'll try and interweave everybody
very
together.
exciting.
Okay. Well, again, give us an idea again the website, and we'll put all the graphics on here later. But what is the website we're looking at again?
It is concussionactiveprevention.com.
Okay. All right. And Kim, again, thank you very much for being on. Like I said, we'll throw a few graphics in here, and we'll touch base with you in the future.
Sounds terrific. Thanks again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay.
Okay.
Now,
Bye-bye.